New Delhi and Washington are in the middle of hectic negotiations to seal a trade deal, even as President Donald Trump has announced a 25% tariff on India, plus an unspecified penalty for buying Russian oil and weapons. Experts say that a deal between the two countries remains stalled over highly protected agriculture and dairy sectors in India. In fact, a US delegation is expected to visit India later this month in the quest for a breakthrough. Late on Monday, the US president repeated the Russia threat as he accused India of buying and reselling massive amounts of Russian oil for big profits. And in the middle of all of this, we bring you an interesting insight, a rare insider's peek into how the US negotiates with its partners and allies, and how Trump thinks about dealing with India. A 2023 book by Robert E. Lighthizer, who was a United States trade representative during Trump's first term and very close to the president, has an entire chapter on India. And it makes some very edgy observations. Let's look at a few of them. Lighthizer writes that when he was in negotiations with Indian officials, he kept a copy of the biography of each of India's 15 or so billionaires at his desk. In predicting Indian government positions, he would look to the interests of these men, and then he recalls an incident. He says that as he was speaking to an Indian friend who had made a fortune, he told him that he thought there were 15 oligarchs who basically ran the country. Yes, he says oligarchs. But his friend, who has not been named in the book, corrected him. His friend told him, and I quote, "Bob, you're wrong. Only about 7 of them actually run the country. The others just try to influence these 7. Lighthizer also writes that India suffers from an extremely strong professional bureaucracy in all areas of the government. It's also unusual in the extent to which these oligarchs influence government policy. Now, India's opposition parties have often alleged that big corporate houses and industrialists such as Mukesh Ambani and Gautam Adani enjoy easy access to Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his government, which works for their interests in return for funds. Congress leader Rahul Gandhi has repeatedly called Modi's government a soot boot ki sarkar, trying to corner the BJP as recently as the 2024 general elections. The Prime Minister has outrightly rejected the allegations and said that such deceitful political vendetta only hurts the electoral prospects of the Congress. While the two industrialists, also India's two richest men, have not addressed the charges publicly so far, their business entities have denied allegations by the opposition on several counts. Much of what Lighthizer writes is also highly relevant and contextual when we look at the latest India trade talks and the conversations around tariffs. In his second term, US President Trump is pushing on with a tariff blitz across countries as he attempts to reorder the global economy with highest rates since the 1930s. The book says that Indian trade policies have long caused tensions with the US. India has high tariffs, a bureaucracy focused on keeping imports out, and a system of industrial policy and protectionism. The former Trump aide, who was once a free trade skeptic, writes that India is particularly protectionist in the agriculture sector, where it uses tariffs and safety standards to help politically potent farmer groups. But that's not all. Lighthizer also has good things to say about the India-US partnership and heaps praise on Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He says that India and the US should be natural friends. They are both democracies, but perhaps the most important thing is the rise and growing militarism of China and the geopolitical concerns for both. According to him, India feels as threatened as the US by the aggressive surge of China, and there is truth in the old saying that the adversary of an adversary is a friend. And about the Indian Prime Minister, Lighthizer says that Narendra Modi is a particularly interesting figure. That he came up through the ranks of right-wing political organizations and clearly considers himself a nationalist. That he is an extremely gifted politician and the first leader of India who was born after its independence. According to Lighthizer, Modi believes in doing things through state control of innovation, high tariffs, and protectionism. And while there are lots of hangovers from the British rule in India, free trade is not one of them. He also recounts an in-person meeting with Modi. During the G7 meeting in France in August 2019, President Trump had a bilateral meeting with PM Modi. India is not in the G7 but was invited by France as a special guest. The two leaders met, and after they discussed foreign policy, PM Modi immediately switched to trade. And Lighthizer writes that Modi clearly wanted GSP back. What is GSP and how did India lose it? In 2019, Trump announced that he was removing India from the Generalized System of Preferences, or the GSP. GSP is a preferential tariff system implemented by developed countries to support the economies of developing countries. India was the biggest beneficiary of the GSP, which allowed preferential duty-free imports of up to $5.6 billion. So, in the meeting, Modi told Trump that GSP had been unfairly taken away and that it had been done during his re-election campaign. He said that the US was being very difficult and that Lighthizer was refusing to deal with his minister, who at that point was Suresh Prabhu. Lighthizer said that it was odd but not unprecedented for him to become the subject of this discussion. After briefly responding, President Trump asked him to speak. Lighthizer writes that he had had enough. He writes in the book, "I thought Modi's entire story was lopsided. He had clearly been misinformed by his staff. I told him that India was removed from the GSP program after his election and not before it. And this," he says, "was done precisely so that it would not be an election issue for Modi." Then he writes that he stated the US's case that India was the most protectionist country in the world. He told PM Modi that he had been negotiating with their trade minister Suresh Prabhu for 2 years and had made absolutely no progress. At times, he writes, Prabhu did not even return his calls for weeks. When the meeting was over, Prime Minister Narendra Modi came up to shake his hand and invited him to India. That visit never happened because COVID struck soon after. Lighthizer says that shortly after the meeting with Modi, negotiations began in earnest. And this time, they were with a new trade minister, Piyush Goyal. He describes Goyal as a smart and gifted politician. He says they made headway but could never quite close the deal. He always felt that Goyal wanted a trade deal but had to contend with the bureaucracy and the farmers as well as Lighthizer himself. And Lighthizer concluded that India really was just protectionist. That it was part of its political DNA and the best way to deal with that was through unilateral action.